listening to yet another episode of Smash the Bug Podcast. I'm your host, Joseph, and
I'm Jesse.
We are brothers here at SwiftOtter, and we are here to talk about smashing bugs, news, and just about anything else that's relevant and important to building websites on the Adobe Commerce platform. We're going to start out with talking about a little bit of news, then we'll jump into... We had a couple of bugs to talk about. We'll see how long that takes, but we also have an interesting topic such as communication to talk through as well. So we got a lot to talk about today, jam-packed schedule, and I hope you're going to stay around to listen as we dive in. So, Jesse, what about some news we got here today?
All right, there's a couple things. One of them is the recent release of Chrome 100. There's not a whole ton to write home about there, but it's still kind of a big step forward, and user agent strings have changed on that. So for those who are still sniffing user agents, which has been established as probably a bad idea for a while now, there might be some interesting things breaking around the web in some hidden places here in the near future as those things are fixed. So that's something that's happened recently. And then another thing is a little bit more related to Magento, Adobe Commerce, is Headworks. And the vendor for modules has changed the way that they are releasing or restricting their Composer repository. And so going forwards, if the license is out of date, as I understand it, they will stop providing those modules to, or basically they will stop allowing access to that Composer repository. Mm-hmm. And so there's been a lot of companies that have probably set up their CI/CD around that. And if you're not using something like private Packagist or something like that, your CI/CD will be suddenly dead in the water if any of those modules are out of date. And there's a lot of Magento websites around. And
Headworks is pretty popular too.
Yeah, there's a lot of Headworks modules installed there. And they gave like a whopping 2 days heads up on that. So... definitely kind of disappointing, and we hope that they will change their minds on that sort of a transition, at least give developers a bit longer to modify broken pipelines. But for now, that's what we've got, and so we're left to react to that.
Yeah, and to be clear, like I get why they're doing it. I get from a business case, and they just got bought, I think, recently. So you got to pay back the acquisition costs, but. And this would be an easy source, easy place to do it. However, there has been notices, just to be really clear, there has been notices on a Headworks website, but some people are not going to a Headworks every single day. I saw an email, I think it was circulated around on social media, and this is I never got that email. And in fact, I don't think anybody I know got that email. So I don't know where that email went out to. But it did not seem to go out to their list of users, and that was challenging to receive that news again 2 days beforehand. So I don't agree with the decision. Like, I think it should have been grandfathered in, but I also understand it's their business, that sort of thing. But I don't know. Like,
yeah, I agree. I think the biggest thing is a heads up. Mm-hmm. To use a little pun there. So I think that would have been the biggest thing, and just making it clear. Developers really appreciate that, and being able to make a transition as opposed to a quick change. So yeah, I understand the business move, and it it makes sense from that sort of standpoint. I have mixed feelings on whether I like that business decision or not.
That's for sure.
But okay, whatever. We all have to do those things. Sometimes we like them and sometimes we don't. I get that. Mm-hmm. But a couple months heads up, or even just 1 month would be nice.
I mean, we did have it on their site. It's been there for a while, but I just have not. It's not been a clear, concise communication. Look at the. It almost has the same type of effect as those Magento patches that were released last month. No, it would have been in February. Yeah. I mean, that was a bit of a challenge. I mean, to be really frank, the wheels at agencies move fairly slow because obviously it's the agency has to get on this. Then you have to work with, you have to get the approval from the merchant. Stuff just takes time. And then when you don't just have one merchant, you got a whole bunch of merchants you got to have to synchronize with. And so some of those wheels just take time. And that was really impressive. I think the community pulled together on those patches. But at the same point, this does not affect production directly. So you do have some time, you can get, but again, depending on the CI/CD pipeline, and we're blessed. I mean, we have Wukash. He's done a phenomenal job with our CI/CD pipeline and private packages and all that stuff. So we were kind of insulated from some of that, but it still is a bit of a problem.
Yeah. So private packages caches the artifacts that are necessary for it. So it insulates agencies like ours that use private packages for something like that. And that's nice for other things as well. But it provides a way forwards in this sort of situation.
Yeah, definitely. Another thing is events are happening again. I'm pretty excited to see some of these start happening. There's a good chance I'll be at Meet Magento UK June 21st. So if you're in UK or the surrounding region, this is going to be a great party. And there was one that you wanted to call out too.
Yeah, so Huva Camp is happening very soon here. I don't have the exact dates, and they are now sold out, so it probably wouldn't matter. But I know at least Wukash, number 2 mention in this podcast, that's got to be a record, is going and attending there too. So I look forward to hearing his thoughts on that, and I'm sure there will be a lot of really cool stuff coming out of there. Looking forward to what all is going to happen there, even though I won't be able to make it.
And we'll be sending him some cool swag as well. So whoever he's feeling generous to that day might get some cool stuff here.
Man, I'm so glad these in-person events are finally starting back again. It's been a long time since we've been able to do that, and now that COVID's kind of passed, I know there's still a lot of different opinions on that, but generally speaking, a lot of people are kind of moving past it now, and that's just really nice to kind of like, okay, finally we come out of hibernation and kind of get back to life and actually see each other in person like we were. It's
going to be so good for the community. I mean, it's just to be able to see people in person again, shake hands, have those conversations. I mean, I'm grateful for Zoom, but it just is not, there's no comparison to doing this in person. Absolutely. Another thing is 244. The question is, should you upgrade or not? Here's the interesting point: is it is still compatible with PHP 7.4. So as long as you get up to PHP 7.4, you're good. And to my memory, I should have written this down. Magento 244 will be supported until I think it's November of 23. 243 is supported until November of this year. So you definitely get a longer window. Well, yeah, you get a longer window of support there. So
and that's the first version where they're removing the vendor bundled extensions. So it'll be a little bit of a different installation process, and there will be a little bit more consideration going into what's actually included in the installation.
Yeah, which I'm not necessarily sad to see those go, because we were just on a project recently. We're working on deploying, and we had to remove .digital because there was an weird error that we were getting in store configuration when trying to save it. So that was our fault. I mean, it was not .digital's issue, but it was an easy solution using node modules, and those shouldn't necessarily be brought over, in my opinion. So I want to share a interesting challenge that we dealt with. It was a couple of weeks ago. We kind of got this solved. It was a pretty lousy situation. If you'll see what I'm saying here, we had a merchant who reported to us that their products disappeared off the site.
That's not a good thing.
No, it was terrible. So literally, they were still in the admin area, but they were not visible on category pages, and so what happens there? And ultimately, like I talk about in the Art of E-commerce debugging book, often you want to preserve evidence. Well, it's really hard to preserve evidence when your site is flat down. Like, I mean, okay, the header and footer's there, but the rest of the site is completely out. So how do you preserve evidence in that case? A MySQL dump is going to take a while, and ultimately we're dealing with an indexer, which is also Elasticsearch. So getting the data out of Elasticsearch, trying to dump that data, which I'm not aware of a good, clean way to do that, as well as trying to preserve the database, all while trying to get this site up as quickly as possible, just doesn't work. And it was a really big challenge. The question is, what caused this? I mean, so our first course of action, unfortunately, but I'm not aware of any way to get around that, was to run the reindexer. We got the products back up, ready to go. Well, it happened again a short while later, and it was maddening. So of course we go in, try to build, we re-index it, and so basically, in other words, we have this random thing in our database, or in the code likely, that is erasing Elasticsearch. What is causing that? So we ended up trying to troubleshoot this. Wukash was on that project again.
Number 3.
Yep, three references there to Wukash. What a guy! I told him he's our firefighter. Unfortunately, some days he spends more time out fighting fires than he actually spends back at the fire station. But that's how it works some days. So yeah, he was working hard on this, and it was a real challenge. We finally, with troubleshooting, and he's really good on the server side stuff. We identified that it could have been maybe an issue with a hosting platform and maybe the cron containers getting out of sync. It was honestly a best guess at that point. And so we identified that there was a problem with the cron containers. And by addressing that, it actually seemed like the problem was solved. And we were really excited about that. That was one of those difficult long-running issues. We implemented some changes to our CI/CD process to adjust how the cron container was recycled, and problem solved. Until about 2 weeks later.
Oh man!
And then it showed up again. So at that point, it's like, what do we do? So clearly, cron container is not causing the issue. It seemed to be somewhat tied to deploys because it happened fairly within 3 hours after deploy on average. And we were scratching our heads, like, what is causing this to disappear? So here's what we ended up doing to solve this problem. It came back to trying to replicate it, because after it happened again, we do a quick reindex, but then we were talking to them. It's like, okay, we need to figure out exact steps of what you were doing here in the admin, because it could be admin related. I mean, I guess it could be cron related, but we're just we feel like cron is not an issue at this point. So talking with them, they say, okay, well, we saved a category. Oh, okay. Well, that's the good piece of information. And they're also using they also have this point of sale system as well. Then it seemed like that maybe that was also causing this. So at least we had a couple leads. We were trying to work through that. We were able to replicate it locally in our development environment, which was huge. Basically, you save a product or save a category, and the products disappeared across the site. Except that at first it was doing that, but then it wasn't doing that later. So what do you do then? Well, it turns out that it was actually another step. You had to, I believe, save a product first. Then you had to go save a category. Then you had to run the reindex from the cron, so it was reindexing. Reindexing the views. So basically, it wasn't doing a full reindex. It turns out that the problem was this: there is a conflict, or was a conflict. Again, digging through line by line of code, trying to piece these different sections together. There was a conflict between the Magento Elasticsearch implementation, basically a class variable that was persisted, and this Mage Store point of sale system. The Mage Store point of sale system was actually using the same adapter for Elasticsearch, which meant that this class variable was reused, which actually happened to store the value of the Magento index name in Elasticsearch. Thus, when the Mage Store point of sale was moving this from one to the other, it ended up destroying the Magento Elasticsearch records.
That's crazy. What was the point of sale moving over?
A good point. The Mage Store POS was using they're using it for SKU lookups and search in the. They index the products and use that as a store to facilitate quick lookups for finding products on the point of sale.
Wow, that's crazy.
It was intense. It was.
So what was the fix like? What did it take to fix it?
The fix was dependency injection, actually. So the fix literally was using there is a shared attribute that you can basically put a type class is, and I remember the exact class name was one of the Elasticsearch classes. Type class name is this, and then I do shared as false. And then so basically it is loaded into Magento and is used in that class, and then it is loaded into the Mage store, and it is not shared. Actually, that I can't remember if it was that or I had to use a plugin. Maybe I had to use both to make sure it was fully. No, I had to use a plugin. That's right. I had to use a plugin to make sure we clean that variable out because this shared when I marked it shared as false, that caused some other problems. So I had to use a plugin to basically, unfortunately, use reflection to clear out that value when we went from one process to the next process.
So it's definitely like a hack or workaround, which works in those sorts of situations, but it would be certainly avoidable through some other core in the Mage store, point of sale, by using likely a factory or concept similar to that to use a different instance. So that's very interesting.
Absolutely, it was a definitely a little bit of stressful time trying to get that figured out, but I'm glad we were able to get it figured out, and that was some pretty deep, hardcore debugging that we had to do there.
Yeah. So I had a situation a little bit ago working on a Vue.js app, which is a little bit of a smaller problem, but still one of those really pesky issues where we were getting reports of users losing some of the data that they had being saved into Vuex. And Vuex is essentially a data layer, if you will. It interacts. It kind of allows you to handle data in a consistent sort of way in the application. And so in this application, users were making a change, and that change was being persisted, but then all of a sudden at some point in their process it was just vanishing. We didn't have much information about it. I certainly couldn't replicate it, and kind of just looking for solutions. Sometimes it just felt like a shot in the dark, except that I did have this one interesting stack trace that pointed to a specific area in the code, and this area in the code handled saving as like an object. So most of the times that the data was saved, it was like key value, right? Calling a function, the first parameter was the key, the second was this first argument, to be precise, was a key, the second was a value. And this particular implementation was an object. It would just pass the whole object there, and the idea was the application would take that object, squish it up, and use that for the update. So not necessarily groundbreaking concept, it's pretty simple, but in this case, that's where the stack traces seem to lead. Again, not much information, but that's where they kind of went. So I spent a fair amount of time trying to figure out how I could get it to work. So I was like, the object should be able to save like this. It shouldn't be clearing old data out. I mean, theoretically, it makes sense. If we somehow don't have the data handled right, then it'll just clear the old data out and save just the new object altogether, which is obviously not ideal. So anyways, I kept trying to force through a solution on that. And one of my coworkers was like, what about this? Why don't we just replace this with something else? And I was like, I don't want to do that, but okay, I'll do that. I think that's probably a good idea. Why not? So I replace it, and it fixes the problem. And it's just like, it took me probably less than 15 minutes, and the code isn't really, I wouldn't say any worse, maybe one extra line of code or something like that. And it was just one of those things that was so silly. It was like, why didn't I do that sooner? But it was ultimately the solution. And I think one of the takeaways that I had from that was like, sometimes it's good to do the obvious. And I was wanting to be like firm and like doing it quote right. But sometimes it's good to just fix the problem. It was one of those things that was like, that was a little bit, it wasn't like a big win, like you were just talking about. With that,
it's just like it's a huge deal.
Yeah, it was
losing
a win.
Data in this application is not. Well, losing data anywhere is not a good idea.
Yeah,
you talk about eroding people's confidence in the application real quick when they start losing data.
And to be honest, there's something that still bothers me about that. I have no idea why that was happening in the first place. Like, I still don't know why that object wasn't working, because as far as I know, as far as I could see in the code, it should have worked just great. But honestly, it works now. And it's good code. I don't think it's bad code or anything like that. So I don't really have any reason to investigate it further. It's just not really worth it. So you probably run into some of those situations as well, where you can't really fully find the answer, and yet you have to move on, and that's just life, and that's the way that works, and that's okay. Sometimes it stinks, and we always love to get a good resolution in place, but where we're like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense. But there are moments when that isn't the case.
Well, I think what you're talking about, if I'm reading this correctly, is the Occam's razor. And basically, so that I'll read it real quick. Occam's razor is the principle of theory construction or evaluation, according to which, other things equal, explanation that posit fewer entity or fewer kinds of entities are to be preferred to explanations that posit more. So in other words, to simplify it down.
That was pretty complex, by the way.
Yeah, it was. Ironically.
You probably have to re-listen to that like 3 times to actually get it.
Well,
or look it up on Google. That's the simpler answer.
Yeah, that's what I just did right here.
Yeah.
Basically, try the simplest solution first.
Yeah.
And that might work. So I think that's a really good comment. Just because, it's frustrating and ultimately getting down to the root cause, like why is that happening? In some cases, it might not matter if the solution solves that problem anyways, So it's really nice and it's often critical. And I think that's one thing that I believe sets us apart, SwiftOtter apart as an agency, is that we are really dogged about getting to the root of problems. But there could be some cases where the problem is solved and we don't see anywhere else that this is going to cause a problem. And, this 15-minute solution versus a 6-hour solution, there might not be a business justification for going at depth to 6 hours. If there is, then absolutely, we definitely need to do that. But in this case, there didn't seem to be any reason to take it past that, and so provided the merchant or the client in this case was good with it, then you just proceed forward, and that's where it actually kind of leads us into our next conversation.
Yeah, conversation about conversations,
communication, exactly. And I'm pretty excited to talk about that because, it's a really important area, and I'll preface it. It's not going to be the longest conversation in the world, but I'll preface it by saying internal conversation facilitates, I believe, good merchant relationships. Developers, project managers, people being able to converse is really what makes merchants happy. Internally, then the relevant bits of information are then passed off to the merchant. And so, Jesse.
Yeah. So
what do you think about that?
You guys can't see it, but I'm wearing my Bugs Fear Me shirt. Oh. And I was thinking that the only thing that bugs fear more than like me or something, or you or some other developer on our team is good communication amongst the team, because then they've got like multiple developers against the one bug.
That's right.
And oh man, he's not even got a chance.
That's right.
I think my shirt has a couple different sweat drops coming off of it, but I think if with it, when you count communication in, there's like 50 sweat drops. Right. It's like he almost dies from a heart attack before we even get there.
The thing is burnt toast.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
but I've seen over and it just makes me it's so awesome to watch when I see in one of our Slack channels, the team is pulling together on a problem, and not only is the problem usually solved really quickly, it's actually there's like something beyond it that gets even better on the project through that. And so, yeah. So what are your thoughts, Jesse?
Yeah. So I think
you are, after all, this chief engineering officer, so you should know a couple things about communication.
Well, yeah, as communication, it's a foundation of the work that we do, right? There's only so much that we can really effectively do in a vacuum. And, there's a time for siloed work. There's a time to have to close the door and just be you doing development by yourself. That's very effective, very good, and all of that. But there's communication around that closed door time. So talking about, what happens, what do you take into your office with you to work on in the first place? That's all happening through communication. And so it's a really important topic. And I think there's some things that I like to think about and talk about with our team that kind of promote really strong communication or very helpful communication, with just a couple different aspects to think about. One of them is action oriented, is what I like to talk about. Is how I like to think about it, and that is the aspect of when I'm communicating. Let's not say I'm communicating something to you, Joseph. I want to make sure that it's clear what I want from you in that communication.
That's right.
Like, why am I telling you this thing at all? that should be clear. When you read it, you should understand, is this just for information? Like, hey, this sort of thing is going on. I've got it dealt with, but I just thought you'd want to know. Or am I asking you a question? Or am I blocked on it because I need more information from you in order for me to complete this task? So action-oriented is making clear the purpose of the communication. And it's really easy to not do that in something like a Jira comment. To just put up the Jira comment.
Oh, yeah.
Right? An email, I think, makes it a little tiny bit harder to do that because you've got to caption your email somehow with the subject. Now, don't skip that part and do write a meaningful subject. And that'll help you communicate the purpose of this message of whatever it is. But Jira comments still apply. Communicate what you are looking for in your message. And it's such Go ahead.
And I was going to also say, though, the documentation in Jira comments is great. Just make sure it's very clearly notated as this is documentation for my internal notes, my debugging. Talk about Art of e-commerce debugging, the TAD framework. This is my notes for this versus here is, this has to do with anybody. This has anything to do with anybody else.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of these like points and actions don't even really take more time to write out. It's just a matter of thinking about, what are you trying to convey in this and making that point clear.
Well, one thing I saw, one of our team members started doing, I loved it, fairly recently was our project managers, bless their hearts, they have a lot on their plate. And this one particular comment that I noticed recently, we've been working to try to prune what communications they see, because it's easy to ping the project manager on every single communication, which kind of ends up overloading them, even though they don't necessarily need to read every comment that comes through Jira. But this one of our developers, Mihal, he put in there, he said, here is the relevant sentence. He called out the relevant sentence for the project manager, and then everybody else, the other couple developers that were relevant for that particular topic, he said, hey, and then here's what is relevant for you. And I thought that was really nice. The action item for the project manager and the action item for the other developers.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of a related point right there, is pinging only the necessary. No, that's good. It was like an example, pinging only the necessary people in the comment. And you won't always get this right, and you know what? That's perfectly fine. In our organization, we have different recommendations or standards on who should be pinged in a comment. This applies to email communication or Slack mentions. It applies anywhere, in basically the people that you specifically mention. And my recommendation is, especially for our team, to ping as few people as possible, right? Don't bring in other people to the conversation unless you feel like it's important for them to know.
That's right.
And think about who is the person that you're directing this to. If you have the first step laid out where it's action oriented, you'll know, it'll make it clear who needs to know about this communication. And so it's kind of like steps almost, right? So who should know about this? Ping only the people that need to know about it, and then make it clear to them what section is theirs, just like you were talking about, right? If you're going to ping multiple people, okay, project manager, this is for you. Developer, this is for you. QA, this is for you. Whoever it is that you're pinging.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good comment.
One thing that's kind of funny, I think, is because it's so simple, is to use a question mark when you are asking a question. Like, write your question in such a way that ends with a question mark, because it allows the person reading it to scan it and see, oh, they're asking me a question. It is possible in the English language to somehow write sentences that are end in periods but are really questions. And I get that, right? That's okay. But for business communication in Jira or whatever, just use the question mark. It works really well.
Yeah, that's a good comment. That is a good comment. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I think, again, that communication then is able for the project manager or account manager, whoever in your organization handles customer interaction, that allows them to be able to quickly get information back up the chain, because especially, and it's really critical in an outage. And one thing I will mention with communication is, it's easy. For example, if there's a site outage, developers in there working hard, and me as a developer, let's say I'm in there working hard, it's easy to get tunnel vision and we're working on solving this problem. Whereas we have to remember, there is a merchant on the other end who sees their site's down, they file a ticket. Hopefully the project manager acknowledges it quickly. But then we hear nothing back until an hour later and the site's up. Well, in reality, the developer's doing this and this and this and this and this and making progress, and they're troubleshooting different angles. And I know it takes extra time and it kind of breaks our line of thinking, but I think from a communication standpoint, it's really important for us to be providing regular updates back so that whoever interfaces directly with the merchant can be feeding that back to the merchant, saying, "Hey, we're working on this. Here's what we try." And in those type of cases, what we say internally is it's okay to get technical. Like even if the merchant doesn't understand what it is we're talking about, that's okay. They're saying we're working on it. We're trying stuff, and in other words, we understand the severity of this crisis.
Yeah, that's important to be frequent in communication in urgent situations, and even in non-urgent situations to be frequent in communication, but it's relative, right? It doesn't have to be every 15 minutes or even every 30 minutes, whatever the frequency is, but it should be at least every day or every 4 hours or something like that, right? Relative to the task that we're working on. And as a part of that, another point to keep in mind is the layout of your communication. So, in my opinion, the most important should be first. So you put the most important at the beginning, and then you support what you just said with backup information, supporting evidence, or whatever. There can be situations, especially in like long discourses, that putting some sort of a summary statement at the end is better than just at the beginning because you don't really have enough at the beginning. But in my observation, usually for like most Jira comments and things like that, it's possible to like, here's what I'm talking about. Okay, now this is some background. What do you think? What should I do? Which is kind of a little bit of a sandwich. You most important up front, question at the end, that sort of a thing. And just thinking about the way that you're laying it out and not burying a question or something really important inside of a big paragraph or right in the middle of your text, but just trying to get that out to where people will be more likely to see it and be able to kind of get context about what you're talking about as quickly as possible.
Well, the other thing is, and I know this sounds ridiculously basic, and maybe we're going to touch on this, but use the formatting available to you. There's bold, there's italic, there's bullets, there is different titles, sizes, there's quotes, there's the horizontal lines. I'm specifically talking about Jira. Strike out and use that. You can overuse something like, too many bullet points deep and that kind of stuff. But like I found that makes comments and paragraphs, that's another thing, that makes these comments much easier to understand and ultimately scan. Like if it's a big blob of text, it's going to seem overwhelming versus if you break it up into 3 paragraphs or turn one of those paragraphs into bullet points, you're going to feel like you get catch on real quick and you're going to be able to form an opinion that much quicker.
Yeah. So that's the thing, using that formatting as a highlight, right? If you put 10 different bolds in a 3-sentence comment, you're gonna lose the effect and you're gonna be right back where you started. So using it to call out something, especially in bigger sections or bigger quantities of communication, goes a long ways to allowing your recipient to understand what you're communicating to them. And remember, communication is about the recipient. It's about the person that's receiving it. It's not about you. It's not about you telling them something. It's about them hearing or getting some information. And all of the things that I've mentioned so far don't really even take much more time, but there is something that you can do that will take a little bit more time that will be really beneficial. And that's after you have written this really high quality piece of communication, right? You have put the most important first. You've pinged people that are only relevant. You use question marks. You it's action oriented, and it makes it clear what you're expecting. After you've written that, go take a moment and reread it. But as you reread it, put it yourself in the recipient's shoes. Just picture yourself as the person that you've pinged. And think about, they don't have all the context. They haven't been working on this for the last 4 hours. They don't know what you're about to ask them. They're coming into this without any of that understanding. Just try to picture yourself like that and reread it and see what changes you make.
I like it. That's good, Jesse. Thank you. That's going to be some real great things we can boil down. We're going to drop into the show notes to make sure that it's very understandable. But yeah, that is excellent. Good. Well, I believe it's time to wrap this up for another episode. Thank you for listening, Jesse. Thanks for coming over here and sharing. This is really good stuff. Very practical, as I always appreciate when I hear from you. So,
absolutely.
Thank you for coming over.
Yeah.
And thank you for listening, our friends out there. We hope that you found this incredibly beneficial. If you did, take a moment to review it on your favorite podcast syndication platform or drop us a comment on YouTube. Make sure to like it, or subscribe to Smash the Bug as well. It is our pleasure to bring this to you. Our goal is to help you become better developers, better whatever your job is in relation to building code. And that is why we are doing this. So thank you for listening. I hope you have an absolutely fantastic week. And we are going to be back with some more great content.